In this build guide, we're going to be taking a look at the Water Swordsman. This is a dual swords build. We're going to cover the Guardian Spirits, Soul Cores, etc., everything for the build. This is a beginner build, starter builds, for the first 50 levels of the game or so. So if you're looking for a build to kind of get going that uses dual swords, go ahead and take a look at this one. We'll be publishing an updated version of this build when we get further into the game. Obviously, we're not there yet, so don't expect this build to work at endgame, but it should carry you a good ways through the game. The Water Swordsman build uses a combination of powerful attacks and quick movement to get into combat, hit enemies, and dodge away. And it also uses ninjutsu to sort of damage enemies and buff yourself in order to get higher ki recovery, so you can keep swinging and keep dealing damage to enemies. The general strategy for this build is that you always want to have the initiative when you're facing an opponent or play defensively. This means that you play defensively while you wait for them to do their attacks, and then you move in and you get your attacks off. Or you begin fights with them unaware and you attack first, and then back away, play defensively, and then move back in for the attack. You're going to use light armor for high mobility and dodging and ki recovery, and also you're going to use the Water Sword skill for this build. It's very, very good, does very, very good damage, and it's very well used in situations where enemies are staggered or they're out of ki. You can just keep dealing damage to them repeatedly. So in terms of stats, dual sword scale primarily off skill, so that's going to be your main stat for this build. Skill also helps you meet the requirements for the light armor special effects, and slightly improves your ninjutsu power, making your ninjutsu skills more powerful. Additionally, it increases your bow and rifle damage, which is great for this build because you're going to be using them a lot as well. The other two stats you want to focus on for this build are Heart and Dexterity. Heart increases the maximum amount of ki you have and bow damage. Ki plays a large part in this build. Being able to have enough ki to dodge, attack, block, etc. is always important for any build, so you're going to want to put some points here in order to have more ki. Dexterity increases the power and capacity of your ninjutsu abilities, allowing you to carry more and deal more damage with them. It isn't the most important in terms of priority, which is why it's last tier, because you're going to use ninjutsu not that often in combat for the harder enemies, possibly. So it's not as important or imperative to have a lot of ninjutsu. You just want enough so that you can carry the skills that you need and deal a decent amount of damage. When it comes to weapons for this build, you're obviously going to be using dual swords, but you can use a Kusarigama in the second weapon slot if you want to use a little bit of range during attacks. You can throw out the Kusarigama for a bit of a ranged attack, so that's nice. But if not, you're going to want to stick to dual swords. And you can actually have two different dual swords, one in each slot, one for specializing in high stance and one for low stance or medium stance, whatever you want here. If you have two different, dual sword setups that have bonuses to particular high or low or whatever, it's a good idea to swap between swords when you're changing stances. When selecting dual swords, you'll want to prioritize damage and ki consumption bonuses. Damage will increase the amount of damage you do per hit, and ki consumption will determine how many hits you can do before you run out of ki, thus increasing your damage or allowing you to roll away with dodge. So they're both good, and you want to have both if possible. As mentioned earlier, another thing you might want to do is if you're using two different dual sword setups, and you have different stances, you may want to focus on swords that have stance bonuses like high attack ki consumption, high attack damage, mid-guard ki consumption, etc. So don't be afraid to look for those bonuses if you're using two different dual sword setups so that you can use the one that best is appropriate for the situation. For ranged weapons, you can either go with bow and cannon to get the maximum amount of shots possible, or you can go with rifle and cannon to maximize your damage. Rifles can just about one-shot anything in headshots thanks to the skill scaling they have and will have a ton of skill. And they have a little bit more mobility than the cannon. The cannon takes a minute to set up, but you're going to want to use the cannon if you're going with the cannon in situations where you want to deal a lot of damage in a hurry, and you can even use that mid-fight if you can pull it off. When it comes to armor, you're going to want to focus on special effects, and you're going to want to look for things like dash ki consumption reduction, things that increase your ninjutsu, or untouched ninjutsu so you can use them more, or for ammo and elixirs as well so you can get more uses out of these things. Some good early sets for this build are: you can use Servant of the Gods. The untouched Sacred Water ability allows you to spam Sacred Water, which increases your ki recovery, and still have a good supply of these, so that's great. You can never have enough ki recovery in this game, and it also allows you to heal when you purify a yokai pool, so that's a good way to get some extra healing. Yokai Slayer is great for taking on yokai. It also has really good stealth against yokai, so you can almost always get in a backstab before beginning combat, which is nice. Increases your damage against them, and gives you life drain whenever you finish any enemy in melee, which is the majority of them. The Vicissitudes of Life set is good. The 3-piece bonus gives you plus 50 ki, which is nothing to sneeze at. It also lowers your active skill ki consumption, which benefits Water Sword, which is great. And you gain melee damage versus yokai, so there's some good bonuses all around. As far as accessories go, these are pretty much a personal choice. I've mentioned this a few times in other builds. They have, Great bonuses for just any sort of general gameplay, like enemy sensor, for instance. So you can take whatever you like here. I do recommend having a pipe, though, as it gives you additional ki. You can never have enough of that. Or one of the black or white fans, as these both increase ki recovery. And again, you can never have enough ki recovery. And then anything with ninjutsu power is also good. So maybe ideally you would have ki recovery, and ninjutsu power, but good luck finding that. So when we get into skills here, let's get into samurai skills first. And when you're talking about samurai skills for this build, you're mostly going to focus on the top and the left-hand side of the trees because you're going to be using high stance a lot for this build. You want the bonuses to that, and also things that increase your bow, rifle, and cannon damage. Also here you'll find the damage boost skill is a custom active skill that you can attach to any of your active skills that will further boost their damage by your skill stat. This is very good for Water Sword and Cherry Blossom. You can go to your skills, customize, and add that. It'll cost more ki to use these abilities, but they'll do increased damage when you do them. When it comes to ninja skills, you can pretty much use whatever you want here. There's a lot of good choices from Gunpowder Bomb to Shuriken, but I really like the Shadow Arts Raijin, Shadow Arts Flaming Heron, and Shadow Arts Yoroka and Water. These are great. They deal elemental damage, lightning, fire, and water, and it gives you a great way to deal with specific enemies that are resistant to one element. You can use the one that they're weak to. To get going, though, it's wise to take something like Gunpowder Bomb so you can spam it and gain skill points from using ninjutsu, because that's how you do it. But from there, you're going to want to get the Shadow Arts, or at least I recommend those. And you're also going to want to grab Sneak Attack and Sneak Thief as quickly as you can. This will allow you to perform backstabs and get extra loot when you do them. When it comes to dual sword skills, it's going to depend on what stance you're using most. If you're prioritizing a stance like High Stance, then you're going to want to get Water Sword and Cherry Blossom, which is what I recommend for this build. Water Stance is just amazing for enemies that have been ki depleted. It can hit them for so much damage, and it just keeps juggling them until they recover their ki. Cherry Blossom is excellent because it jumps to the enemy at the end of the combo, reaching enemies that would normally dodge backwards. A lot of enemies in the game jump backwards as the end of your combo, so you miss with some of the later hits. This is a great way to close that gap. In the mid-stance branch, you're going to get a lot of good bonuses to blocking and counter strikes, but these are only really useful against human enemies. These are really the only enemy type that you can use a lot of these on very easily, though Random Slice can be very good at closing the distance on enemies while dealing damage. When it comes to passives, I'm just going to put some of these up here on the screen. You can see Relentless is good for increasing your ki. Momentum is one of the best skills for reducing the amount of ki you use while attacking. And there's a whole bunch of other good passive skills here. You can check these out. I recommend getting all of these if possible. When it comes to Omnio Magic, it's not something you're going to be using frequently, but what you want to look for here is the Barrier Talisman. This talisman increases your ki recovery speed by a ton, and makes it so that you automatically dispel yokai realm pools when you just walk or run over them. So if you throw it on before a boss fight, not only are you going to have increased ki regeneration, but you can dispel all their pools just by moving around, which you'll do in general. And it allows you to gain extra Omnio Magic skill points since you'll be using it quite often in these scenarios. So if you ever want to respec at some point, you'll have a bunch of Omnio Magic skill points that you can use for some other build. When it comes to shifting skills, you can take Arcana of Lightning. This is going to allow you to put lightning damage on your active skills. It works really well with Omne no Mitori, which is the beginning Feral Guardian that will take it. Adds lightning damage if you meet the requirements. So you can add lightning damage to Water Sword, Cherry Blossom, or Sign of the Cross to deal increased lightning damage, but you don't have to. Other things you'll want from this skill tree are the Yokai Within and the Dark Within. This helps with ki recovery when fighting in Yokai pools if you happen to not have Barrier up. And also in the Dark Realm, anytime you go into those Dark Realm areas when fighting bosses or just on the landscape, you have reduced ki recovery. This is going to help reduce the penalty you take for the ki recovery in there. So make sure you get these passives. Also, Special Finesse Invigorate and Special Finesse Refresh are going to help with ki management. They're going to increase ki whenever you do a burst counter, which is excellent. When it comes to Guardian Spirits, you're going to want a Feral Guardian type. I actually recommend this for just about any build, mostly because you can dodge into these attacks from further away, making the timing on them not as important because you can get to the distance you need to be a lot quicker, and you don't have to be perfectly in range to do these, keeping you at a safer distance from the enemy. Luckily, Ame no Mitori is the Guardian Spirit you can take at the beginning of the game. This is a Feral Guardian, and it gives you running speed, ki recovery speed, which are both great for this build, and it can increase your lightning damage if you meet the requirements. So if you decide to put lightning on your active skills with Arcana of Lightning, that's good. And that can also boost, lightning talismans or Shadow Arts Raijin if you're going to use those abilities as well. Another option if you don't want to use this Guardian Spirit is Shirohame. The anima you gain while blocking is good in boss fights, and also you gain life drain when performing kills, which helps a lot with survivability. Unfortunately, there aren't really any other good Guardian Spirits earlier on in the game, so you're probably going to be using one of these two for, the first 50 levels or so. When it comes to soul cores, there aren't any perfect soul cores for this build, so you're free to use whatever you want. But I really like the One-Eyed Oni soul core because it increases your strong attack damage and your break. But also because if you run out of ki at the end of a combo, you can just use it real quick, and it sort of finishes your combo off, depleting an enemy of ki or whatever, and preventing you from taking damage. And as far as the second core goes, I really like Enki for this build because it gives you a ranged attack, which is something this build kind of lacks in terms of, you know, what you're using for ninjutsu is a few spells, and you want to use them in very important situations and not to just finish off an enemy with the last hit. So you can use that Enki to, you know, throw a ranged attack. And it's also great because it takes you high up into the air, so if you're in a situation where you're about to get gangbanged or whatever, you can just use it and you'll get out of harm's way very, very quickly. Some final tips for this build: when you find an enemy, always think about how you want to approach it. If you can sneak behind it, you want to start with a backstab. If it's facing you but immobile, maybe you want to shoot it with a ranged weapon and kill it. Or maybe if it's patrolling, you want to start with Sign of the Cross skill in order to deal damage really, really fast. You need to sort of assess the situation and figure out which tools you have is best for the situation that you're facing. When you're fighting faster-paced enemies, it's a good idea to move from high stance to mid or low stances because you can't always get your attacks off in time, and you're going to take damage if you just try and force that high stance through. So remember to swap stances when it's appropriate. You don't always want to be in high stance. Sometimes there's a better stance for the job, so don't be glued to high stance all the time. You want to be aggressive against enemies that are about out of ki. If an enemy is low on ki, it's usually advisable to just keep going with your combo, even if you're going to run out of ki at the end, in order to perform a grapple or final blow, because this is usually going to finish off the enemy or take off a shit ton of health. And even if you don't kill them, you have time to recover ki while you back away and wait for them to get off the ground and recover. When it comes to ninja skills, you're going to want to save these for the particularly troubling enemies or bosses, enemies that you're having difficulty with fighting the normal way that you would fight. Don't be afraid to spam these skills and take them down or set status effects on them that make it a lot easier for you. This is what you want to save these skills for. And also, you know, you can go to your shrine and swap out your shadow arts in order to get a more potent element for that enemy you're facing. Maybe it's resistant to the one you're using. Go to your shrine, grab the one that's best appropriate, and use that one. Remember to block. You can roll and dodge with your block up without any penalties. It's important to remember this because if you're blocking when you roll and an enemy connects with you and you didn't finish your dodge in time, it'll actually hit your block first. So get used to blocking and then rolling instead of just dodging. It'll help prevent you from taking damage. Lastly, keep an eye on your ki bar and remember that you don't always need to finish your combo. Sometimes it's better to hit only once or twice and then retreat to safety before finishing a combo in order to prevent yourself from being killed, because if you run out of ki and you can't dodge, you can just get smashed to death and die very, very quickly. So sometimes it's better not to just finish a combo. Keep an eye on this and make sure that you know when to keep going and when to ease off. Stay tuned for more Nioh 2 guides, including builds and weapon guides, and be sure to check out our review for our thoughts on the game. If you need further help, head over to the Nioh 2 wiki, and don't be afraid to add information that might help others out.